Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back. Just a quick sound check, Donna and Bernie, before I introduce you. You can hear me?
Can hear you fine.
Beautiful. Well, welcome back, everyone. This, believe it or not, is our third season, first episode of our Association Leadership Series. And you, our audience, have responded so well, both during the webinars we've been doing and, of course, the chat questions that come in fast and furious. I want to, first of all, wish those who are recognizing Yom Kippur today an easy fast. And I know we have lots of our clients that do recognize it, so the best. And I want to introduce our returning star, Donna DiMaggio Berger, shareholder at Becker Law Firm. Donna, welcome back.
I'm so happy to be back, and I'm delighted to have Dr. Fernandez joining us today, James.
Well, thanks, Donna. We did miss you last month, but I'll make a couple comments on what we did and how it went. And when you all register for this, we ask you what questions you'd like to ask. And there was a lot of questions about vaccination. What can we do? What can't we do? And Don and I thought would be very, very helpful if we had someone that actually knew what they were doing as it relates to the medical side of this. And I'm so happy and proud to welcome my friend, Dr. Bernie Fernandez, who's the CEO of Baptist Health Medical Group. So Bernie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And our plan today for the audience is to start with Bernie, get some really interesting data. I think some of it may surprise you. On the Delta variant mostly. And then after that, we'll try and answer some of these questions about what does this mean in relation to how we're running our communities. And there's a couple of data points in there, especially for our 55 and older communities that may affect how some of the decisions you make. Before we get going on that, last month we had Nicole Johnson of Hafer along with my partner Craig Vaughn on, and we did an incredible session on budgets. Your feedback was really strong, and I think we may have to do another one on that. And a lot of people have asked, can we get the recording? And I just want to remind everyone, all of our webinars are available at casagroup.com. And if you have any questions about that, or if you have any questions, even as we go along or after, it's info@casagroup.com. I do want to remind everybody, I've got a brilliant lawyer and a brilliant doctor on here today, and they're going to share, but it is not medical or legal advice. It's a discussion. The other thing I wanted to say is Bernie obviously runs the Southeast Florida mostly, and so some of the data is South Florida oriented, and I know we have audience across Florida and into Texas, but for the most part, it's reflective. So I wouldn't read too much into that. But if you notice some of the PowerPoint that Bernie shares with us, and then of course we're going to do some polling throughout. In fact, I want to start with a poll, Bernie, before we get going, and you can chat in your questions. In fact, I see the chat started. I haven't even opened it up, so I will try and kind of group all of your chat questions in together. So yeah, we thought we would give Bernie some data on our audience. Now, you don't have to answer this question. It's all anonymous, so don't worry about it. But it would be really interesting to see, Bernie, from our audience, who's vaccinated and who's wearing masks in public, because we're going to learn from your data that those are the two drivers of the spread of this virus. And while we do that, just the agenda today is going to be an update from Bernie on COVID, mostly the Delta, some response by Donna on what does this mean to our communities. We have had, the first couple ordinances come through on the building inspection rules that we anticipate as a result of the Surfside tragedy. So we'll have a beginning of a discussion on that. We're going to have to do a whole session. And then you had some really good questions about reserves, and we do believe reserves are going to be probably mandated in the next legislative session. So we wanted to get to those, but it looks like everyone's answered. Let's share the data on the first poll question. Can you see that now, Bernie?
I can.
Hey, look at our audience, Bernie, 92%. I mean, this is a remarkable group we have, but I thought that would tee it up nicely. I know you have some slides and some comments with some really now data that you want to share with the group. So please go ahead and
Let me see if I can.
share your screen.
Yeah, let me see if I can figure that out. I think this may be the one. I don't know if you can see that.
We can.
I'm trying to get the poll out of my, there we go. Maybe I can close it now. And I put on presentation mode. You can see that?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay,
Perfect.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, great. I have to tell you that the first remark I'll make on the poll, that was pretty cool that you guys did that. And if that was representative of America, we would already be over this entire surge and probably the entire pandemic at 90-something% of people vaccinated. So that's just a commentary. So again, thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity. And I don't have to educate all of you on COVID-19 because we have all lived it. But I did want to make the point that many people still in our community do not understand, and that is that the Delta variant is a very different virus. It's not the same virus that we call now the ancestral strain. So the ones that came out of Wuhan, etc. That was a very different virus. The Delta is much more transmissible, and something that's very deadly, the Ebola virus, something that we dealt with some years ago. You'll probably remember that smallpox and how deadly that is. So imagine Delta is more transmissible, not saying more deadly by any means, but much more transmissible. And Delta is as transmissible as chickenpox. And that is something that I remember even going back in medical school. One of the main things you always protected your pregnant patients was make sure you're not exposed to any child or anyone with chickenpox. So that gives you a perspective of how different a virus this is. A little busy slide. I'll just have you concentrate on the far right. The original virus, 1 to 2 people were infected if they were exposed. Then the UK variant, you remember that? Number 3, it was 1 to 3 people. The Alpha then came about and became the prominent virus in the US. And one of the waves, it was 1 to 4 to 5 people were infected if exposed. And here's where Delta is right now. Between 5 to 8, one person can infect 5 to 8 people. So again, very different virus than the original one. And just for perspective, we're putting there the mumps and the measles and how transmissible that is, and then the R-tau, the R-naught transmissibility. And this just gives you again how quickly the Delta has become in the middle column. You see on the alpha, beta, and there's gamma over here, Delta, and how quickly Delta just became the most prominent variant in our country. In fact, it's over 90% now in the United States.
Bernie, if I could just interject there. This was when we did the prep for this webinar yesterday. We're actually dealing with a different disease than we had in 2020. It was, and now 96% of COVID infections are Delta. I just wanted to re-emphasize that for our audience because it is truly a different virus.
That is absolutely correct. That's an excellent observation. Now, we talk a lot about herd immunity, and you didn't see this one, James, yesterday when we ran through the slides, and I figured this would be an important one to share with the audience. Based on the transmissibility, people are really smart to figure out what it takes to become or to develop a herd immunity. We all have been hearing about herd immunity since 2 years ago. So the initial strains that I mentioned, you probably need around 60% of people to be vaccinated to develop the herd immunity or to develop the illness. Influenza takes about 52. Measles is very high. And that's why in measles, you even see in pockets around the US that are not vaccinated, you see these outbreaks because it's still, you've got to have around 94%. Look at the Delta, again, to James' point. The R naught is about 8. You can infect between 5 and 8 different people. We're looking probably to having to have around 90% of herd immunity in order to have an appropriate response. So that just puts in perspective, how different of a virus it is and the need for our society to undertake some other measures until we get to about the 90% herd immunity. I thought that would be an
really quick question.
please.
Can the R naught for Delta continue to increase? And the R naught being the number of people that one infected person with Delta can then infect. Right now, you said it's at between 5 and 8. Can that continue to increase? Meaning that we need a higher vaccination rate?
It can only if you have a different variant. If we go back to the other slide, you will see that the Delta also now has 2 other variants that are coming out of it. So we don't know what they are yet. We don't know how they're going to behave. It's nice to see that the Delta AY2 has not changed in the last 4 measuring periods. So, but that's a good question. We are hoping that will not be the case, but it's certainly a possibility that it can get to kind of someone else or another variant come up to the measles category. That is possible. God only knows, right? So very good question. Again, to kind of just go over some of the data, globally confirmed 224 million cases, global deaths are going to approach at the end of the year around 5 million. We've had 40 million cases in the United States. The unfortunate 659,000 deaths so far from this. These are mothers, fathers, grandparents, brothers and sisters, and close friends. I don't know that anyone doesn't know someone who has passed away from COVID. In my family, I lost one of my aunts in her 70s from that. So we have all been touched by the ravages of this pandemic.
Bernie, there's a couple of quick questions that have come in. Are people who test for positive for COVID, are they told which variant they have?
No, not typically.
Okay.
Not typically. That's used more for epidemiological, but it's easy to assume that if in your area the Delta is the dominant variant, you probably are doing that.
Okay.
But the CDC, the Department of Health, is obviously checking all those variants to make sure, and they can even do that through just testing sewage water.
Right. Okay. And the other question is, if I test positive for COVID, is there anything specific I should be doing to try and stay out of the hospital?
If you test, that's an excellent question. I'm gonna touch upon that in a second.
Okay, keep going then.
If you do test positive for it, and you have some of these potential conditions, you might want to speak to your doctor and make sure you meet the criteria for antibody infusion to make sure that you don't end up in the hospital. Right? It's the one armamentarium that we have that is different than when we had the original, and it's a good thing that we do have that. So Regeneron monoclonal antibody infusion. So age has been shown to be a risk factor. Obviously, the older, again with Delta, I'll show you some data that actually now it's affecting the much younger population. Chronic illnesses, immunocompromised, elderly, patients with Crohn's disease, etc. If you're a smoker, any lung disease, obesity, again, restriction. Pregnant women are also at risk of developing major complications, significant complications of COVID. In Italy, being a male was associated with higher complication rate. And obviously, the most important for us to remember is to being unvaccinated, and I'll share some data with you. That's in the United States. This is what this looks like, a very significant number of peaks. The highest peak was the last one. Here's one. I'll put it in perspective. These are actually the cases, not the deaths. We're going to get now to the deaths, but very, very long road. If you're a healthcare professional, imagine how tired you are after 2 years of every single patient that you're treating. Remember, you've got to put on special protective equipment, take it on, put it on, and then take it off before you're able to go see the next patient. It's exhausting. It really is exhausting. These are the cases of the past 10 weeks. We're seeing again the downward turn, about 100,000 cases or so. The positivity rate, likewise in Florida, continues to drop, around 13.5% of all the tests that are positive. Hospitalizations in the United States, you can see what that looks like. And this is the monoclonal antibody infusions that I mentioned earlier. When we had the earlier part of the pandemic, we were doing a couple of hundred. At the peak, we were doing about 400. This is what happened when Delta hit. The number of people that met the criteria that became pretty sick went up exponentially, so much so that we've hit over 1,000. And now if this is actually Baptist data, and we've begun to see the decrease on the other side, not only because things are getting somewhat better, because also the government now is in the monoclonal antibody infusion business, because they realize this is one way that you can keep people from going to the hospitals and overwhelming the healthcare system locally and at the state level.
Does that antibody, the Regeneron, Bernie, does that need FDA approval? And what exactly is it, really quick?
It is. It's an antibody that is made in the laboratory, and it prevents the cells from being affected by the virus. So it literally is the same antibodies that you would create on your own, particularly after having a vaccine. These are the same things that people are getting. That it's used to block, again, the effects of the virus on the human cells. But one interesting point to me is folks that are resistant in getting vaccinated, yet when they become sick and I realize they're scared, they're more than willing to go ahead and get the Regeneron infusion. When in fact it's probably very similar technology, and that's been tested in the same way. But that's just my own edification on that. So these are the deaths in the United States. This is how bad things have looked for us. You can see the last. These are the elderly patients. These are include the one on the right includes much more younger patients. 1,500. That is several jets falling out of the sky every single day. These are daily deaths. 1,600 people we're losing in the U.S. currently from the Delta. Again, the Florida Weekly Report, you can see actually even higher than we were in the past because of the whole Delta pandemic. And this is now bringing it down closer to us. This is now Baptist Health and our hospitals. See, again, to James' point at the very beginning, we're primarily located in Miami-Dade County with the other hospitals in Palm Beach County. So this is what the pandemic has looked like to us since the very beginning. At the very left, when it started early 2020, and then you see all the different surges that we have had to work our way through. This last one being quite severe, quite taxing. We're admitting over 150 people a day with COVID, most of them necessitating high flow oxygen, to the point that all the regional hospitals reached out to federal and state government for help because we were running low on oxygen, which had never happened in the past. This was a new one for us in healthcare. And this is what our patients look like. If you look at all the COVID admission patients that we have within Baptist Health, you can see the majority of the patients and the distribution of their age, which ones are vaccinated and which ones are not vaccinated. Big number of them, 35% of all the admissions are in the 18 to 49 years of age. You can see, again, 34% of them, of all of them, are unvaccinated. 24% in the of the overall are unvaccinated in the 50 to 64, and then the 65 and over. So this gives you an idea. If you take all these as 100%, the overwhelming majority, 70-something% are unvaccinated patients. So I thought that would be pretty illustrative of the importance of vaccination and the difference between the two. This is, to me, a pretty sad slide. And I'm sharing something with you that I've not shared with other audiences. And this is the mortalities that we have had since July and this new wave of the pandemic. The blue represents those patients that are unvaccinated, and the orange represents those that are vaccinated. You can almost split this group in half. If you go to the 60 and younger, you can see all the young people that we have lost that are unvaccinated. And you can see those that are vaccinated and they likely had underlying conditions, etc. I can't tell you, we haven't done those record review, but you can see that it's very uncommon. And look at the far left. This is a 23-year-old patient, a 24-year-old, a 25, a 27, a 29, 3 of them in their 30s, 1 32, 2 and 33. How terrible is that? These are people who had their lives ahead of them. Now,
Bernie, I just want to interject. This was the slide I thought, Donna, we can comment after Bernie's remarks are over. If you're on the board right now of an over 55 community, and we know the average age of over 55 communities can be 75, this 60 line, basically what it means is under 60, your probability of dying if you're vaccinated is really, really low. And I know there's some exceptions to that, sadly. But look at the 83 years old. There were more that have died that were vaccinated than unvaccinated. And I think, Donna, this is going to affect how our boards of older communities should be thinking about what policies and how they hold their meetings and should they be congregating, because most of our older communities are highly vaccinated, just like this audience, but they still have high risk with Delta. So we'll come back to that. But Bernie, I didn't want to leave this slide. To me, this was the most powerful one in terms of policy at communities.
Definitely something for consideration, social distancing, all the other things that we're supposed to be doing until such time you've got actually the herd immunity and those people at risk that may be in this large group of the vaccinated older than 75 who may have underlying medical conditions that they have received their third dose or their boosters.
But Bernie, it seems to me that age is an underlying condition. And I think you just touched on that, James, that once you get past a certain age, the vaccine, even if you're fully vaccinated, is not the only tool you should rely upon, because being that age is one of the underlying conditions, even if you don't have other health issues. Is that correct?
You got it. Well, in a sense, yes. It's hard to make blanket statements that say, well, if you're older, because folks may interpret that as, well, then what's the sense if I'm over 83 to get vaccinated? And that would not be the message to deliver, other than to tell you that we would have a heck of a higher number here if you were older and unvaccinated, rather than these that are at least the ones that are vaccinated. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And Bernie, we have about 5 minutes left in this segment.
Yep. So let me,
Yeah.
I've got a few more only. So again, this is sharing some of what our mortality by vaccination status looks like right now. Overwhelmingly, over 65, more than double that number are unvaccinated. And then you can see 50 to 64 and 18 to 49. And James, I don't think I showed you this slide yesterday.
No.
So I wanted to add that. So vaccines, again, very important. Some of this misconceptions of the vaccines are out there. You all hear them, all social media. COVID-19 vaccines, they cannot be spread from a person. You cannot breathe a vaccine onto somebody else. There's no data that affects fertility right now. It's recommended by all 3 obstetrical societies, or those who are planning to conceive or get pregnant, during all 3 pregnancy trimesters and including in the breastfeeding or lactation period. The 3 obstetrical societies have come out in favor of being vaccinated. They're not made from the COVID-19 virus. They do not alter people's DNA or nucleus. They don't contain nanochips or magnetic material. They don't cause the COVID-19 infection. And most important, they're safe and they're very effective. And this is some of the things that are talked about out there in the community about potential complications of getting the vaccine. And this is a comparison of vaccine versus actually being infected with the virus. You can see overwhelmingly blood clots, arrhythmias, kidney injuries, myocardial infarction. You hear a lot about myocarditis, much higher with developing COVID. The only thing that you get is lymph node enlargement, like I did in my arm, in my axilla following, and that is a normal reaction to the vaccine. Again, the blood clot issue, look at the patients who have the vaccine, 0.0004%, 4 cases in a million vaccinated. If you get COVID, 165,000 cases in a million for 16.5%, something we prescribe in our country quite commonly. Birth control pills, widely known, even to medical students, will be a risk factor for blood clots, 0.05% to 0.12%. Much more prevalent and much more common, and yet we use it every day in our country. If you're vaccinated, 25-fold reduction in the chances that you're going to die, that's very powerful. 25-fold reduction in hospitalization and 8-fold reduction in just developing the disease or severe disease. If we had not vaccinated people in this country, this is what this looks like, we would have had another additional 280,000 deaths in this country and up to 1.25 million additional hospitalizations. This is a very good, and I'm giving you where you can find the source. So again, let data guide you in decision making. Do not make it Google and people's Facebook accounts. So again, in summary, Delta very contagious, likely more severe disease. Breakthrough infections may be as transmissible as unvaccinated ones. Vaccines, more than 90% of severe disease are preventable, but maybe a little bit less preventing the infection or the transmission. So therefore, breakthroughs and more convenient spread is likely because this thing is so darn infectious. And non-pharmaceutical interventions are very important. And still, the distancing until we get over the other side. Thank you.
I want to just a couple quick questions for you, Bernie, and then we'll let you go if you'd like. Can you put up poll question, the next one? It must be 2, Mariness, because I want to ask Bernie about this, but I want people to answer before I ask them. And while that poll question goes up, I want to find out how many will be getting their flu shot even in the midst of COVID and that vaccination. But before those results come in, Bernie, we have some questions here on the booster. Should we be getting the booster or not?
Booster for which one? The flu shot or
for a COVID vaccine booster?
Yes, once it is approved, for those people that are undergoing, for example, chemotherapy for cancer, the CDC has pretty much come out and said, you should get your 3rd dose. They're calling it, rather than the booster, like they're for the rest of us, they're calling it your 3rd dose. So if you're immunocompromised, the answer is yes. We believe sometime next week, the CDC will announce that you should be getting the booster. And the answer is, if I'm eligible for it, because I've taken it more than 8 months ago, I will definitely plan on doing that.
Excellent. And a lot of people are asking whether we should get the flu shot or not. Should we get the flu shot?
The answer is also yes. The flu shot has been typically every year you've got significant deaths that occur even in some young people who develop a real severe ARDS from the flu. We have seen mitigated lower amounts of flu last year when everyone was wearing a mask. But the recommendation is still to get the flu shot. That's absolutely correct.
Excellent. And Mariness, can you share the results? Bernie, final question. When does this end? I want a definitive answer with a date, please.
If I only had that crystal ball, I would definitely share that with you, but I don't. We believe that this wave is coming to an end. I believe that this is going to continue until we're able to reach that 90-something% herd immunity. And I'm hoping, for the sake of our society and the sake of our healthcare heroes, that that comes to an end sooner rather than later.
Excellent. Well, Bernie, we're now going to digest the implications of some of this in terms of the policies that we're going to do. So Don, I'm going to put you on the spot, and Bernie, you are welcome to stay, but I know you're busy. If you have to sign off, we're so
I will
grateful.
sign off.
We are
Thank
so
you for
grateful.
having me. Nice to see you both.
Very grateful for you
Yeah.
jumping on. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Donna, I want to start with, actually, I want to start with a poll question. By the way, it looks like 74% of people are still going to get the flu shot, which sounds like a good thing. I want to start getting into what does this all mean to us in our communities? And can you put up poll question 3, Mariness, please? I'm just moving my screen around here, Donna, to get you in the middle. So Donna, starting with, I know we have a federal mandate out there and we've got some state fighting the feds, and we can talk about that. But can we even make any special policies in our communities because the emergency powers are over? They ended on June 26th. Where are we as a board of directors? What ability do we have to shape policy at this point?
Well, James, and I'm so glad we had Bernie on, because that data was so eye-opening, and it's really disheartening because we had more assistance from our state and local officials when we were dealing with a much weaker, less transmissible virus. And people were taking it more seriously, and we had a state of emergency statewide. We had local states of emergency. We had ordinances. We had all this support for volunteer boards to be able to say to their residents, we need to do these things. Now that's all fallen by the wayside. As a matter of fact, we have some government moves to actually make it more difficult to implement safeguards. And we're dealing with, remember, Bernie told us previously, the Arnold Schwarzenegger of viruses now. Before we were dealing with the wimpy, kid of that virus, and now we're dealing with Schwarzenegger in his prime. So it is extremely concerning, because we also have COVID fatigue. We're almost, we're well past a year and a half of this, and people just don't want to hear about it anymore. But to answer your question, emergency powers do not have a cutoff date when the state of emergency, the statewide state of emergency, ends. There is a triggering event. In order to activate them, the governor had to declare a state of emergency, which he did back in March 2020. But remember, the language in the statute says that those powers continue for as long as is reasonably necessary. And I don't think, James, we've ever gotten below 5% positivity in the state of Florida. And particularly in some of our counties, it's much, much higher. I think right now the positivity rate in Florida is 13.5%. So we've got a couple things I would urge everybody listening to continue to reach out for legal opinions on which to base their continuing COVID protocols. They might want to, continue to tweak these. I have clients, and I'm sure you have clients as well, that are looking to, once again, as we head into the fall months and winter months, to start restricting guests again, to start requiring proof of vaccination for vendors and all that.
Well, this is, I think, an important takeaway, and I'm going to reinforce what we keep reinforcing. You have to seek counsel with your community association attorney. But I frankly was surprised, Donna, that I remember you telling me that when emergency powers end, there is a period of time in which to adjust. And I didn't appreciate that, the Delta variant has actually extended that period of time, possibly subject to your attorney's opinion. Now, I want to share the results of what boards are currently doing. I've had a couple questions up here about how many people are on and how many people are responding. And it moves around during the hour, but just so you know, we generally get around 300 participating, and that's true today, and 200 would answer the survey. So I think the reason the question came in is this statistically sound data. I mean, these are big numbers for data. So I hope that answers the questions.
James, I just
there.
want to circle back because whether or not emergency powers are still in effect is a really important question. Remember, I served on that task force, the legislative task force on emergency powers. Now, there were tweaks to the emergency power statutes in 718, 719, and 720. At one point, there was some discussion to implement a finite cutoff date for those powers. Guess what? That never got into the bill. So that was a purposeful move to recognize that these powers don't just end when the state of emergency ends. And then the only other thing I would say is get a legal opinion from your attorney as to what your documents provide in terms of rulemaking authority, because boards have had, pretty broad powers under their documents to pass reasonable rules to safeguard the health, safety of their residents.
Good clarification, Don, and I'd like to share, Mayor Ness, the results of the policy changes that our audience have been making in their communities. Donna, you can see the results there now. This is a significant change from our last webinar. People are adjusting their policies to the new facts. Okay.
But that's the problem, James. So before we move off of that, first of all, that question didn't distinguish between indoor common areas or outdoor common areas. So I can understand if there's been a loosening of the outdoor common areas, but that's troubling because the COVID shield liability law protects associations from lawsuits related to COVID injuries and deaths, so long as a board is providing a standard of due care as reflected by the current public health guidance. We just had Dr. Fernandez on.
Not sure whether Donna has frozen for the rest of the audience. Where we're going here is Senate Bill 72 provides our boards and our associations. Donna, you froze for the last 60 seconds.
Okay. It's saying my internet connection is unstable. My point, can you hear me now, James?
Yes.
So my point being that this can really be problematic because if there is a potential lawsuit, what's going to happen is the date that they believe that the harm occurred, they will look to what public health guidance was on that date, what the positivity rate was in Florida on that date, what the CDC was recommending, and plaintiffs' counsel will try to say that your relaxed guidelines did not meet the standards that CDC was putting out there. And you weren't taking into account the risks associated with this variant.
And I think this is, I always like trying to highlight what I think are the most important takeaways of each of our webinars. Senate Bill 72 is the COVID liability law. It does provide some protection if you follow reasonable guidelines. In the absence of local or state, the CDC is kind of the place to look. So again, I think this is one, if you're thinking of making any policies that are inconsistent with that, you seek legal counsel. We have a lot of questions on the board about the federal mandate, Donna, and even some very specific ones on management companies, and I can only speak for Castle, but it's been very interesting, and we'll get into a minute the conflict between state and federal, but let me just respond to the several questions here. If you have a management company with over 100 employees, they are going to be subject to the federal law change. The way they're implementing this is they've handed off to a Department of Labor, and these will probably come through, OSHA regulation. But we will have no choice, subject to the Fed-state fight, and that we will have to have our teammates vaccinated or tested. But Donna, that's for if you've got a management company with over 100 employees. By the way, all of the major firms in Florida and Texas have over 100 employees. But we have some self-managed communities on here. If I just have my 10 on-site employees, does the federal mandate have any impact, Donna, on my operation?
So the federal mandate is not going to have an impact, but I know, and by the way, James, I don't really know any associations that have more than 100 direct employees. I think my largest community that it has 60 employees, but there may be a few out there. If they have more than 100, then it will, direct employees, the federal mandate will impact them. But I have a lot of communities that have fewer than even 50 employees, fewer than 10 employees, and they may still want to, as a private employer, mandate that their employees be vaccinated or tested weekly. Okay, OSHA has said that that's okay. I would again, if you want to implement that vaccination policy for your direct employers, speak to your association counsel, who hopefully has labor expertise, and get an opinion.
Yeah, I just want to again repeat that one. That's important. You can under OSHA and Department of Labor guidelines require vaccines, but there are a whole bunch of exceptions to that. I just want to make one kind of operational, practical response to this. The management industry is having a very tough time right now hiring. And all management companies have open positions right now because we just can't hire people. This mandate will affect that. So even if you've got 10 employees, if you decide to mandate vaccinations and you've got some number of teammates that don't want to do it, you could be in a situation where you have an unstaffed building. So there's kind of this tension between the practical of how, we can't get enough people as it is, to the wish that everyone is vaccinated. Okay, now we dive into Governor DeSantis and Governor Abbott in Texas have a very different view of things than the federal government. Where does this all lie? You've got I think there's a statute now, 381, Donna, that says we're not allowed to do vaccine passports, or we'll get fined $5,000. Just talk to our audience a bit. How do we reconcile all this stuff, and can we mandate vaccines if we're going to get fined $5,000?
Oh, so it's confusing. So there is language in Chapter 381 of the Florida statutes, which we call the vaccine passport law, James. It addresses what business entities can do, what governmental entities can do, and what educational entities can do. For purposes of this webinar, we're concerned about the business entities. Now, we recognize that associations, community associations, even though the vast majority are not-for-profit corporations, are considered business entities under both this COVID vaccine passport law, as well as that COVID shield liability law we just talked about, which is the protective statute. Here's the rub, though. The statute says a business entity may not preclude service or entry to customers or patrons. So for the vast majority of condominiums, cooperatives, and homeowners associations, they don't have customers or patrons, okay? There may be a few communities, there are some communities where they may have a restaurant facility or are larger HOAs, like I'm thinking some in Palm Beach County, where the HOA has been merged with the country club, and the country club facilities have now become common areas. For those folks, this COVID vaccine passport law may impact them. But for the vast majority of associations, the question is, do they have patrons or customers? For instance, a lot of my communities now say, you know what, when we're dealing with contractors coming into the building, we want to only hire a crew that's vaccinated. This could be a house cleaning. This could be a cleaning crew, for instance. It's a different analysis, James, than the landscapers who work outside, where you're outdoors, you're not going to necessarily come in contact with them. So I do think this is something that every board needs to be discussing with legal counsel, because the fines are significant. Under 381, it is a $5,000 fine per violation. Now that could also be every person that does that mean if you have a crew of 10 people working indoors and you required the 10 of them to be vaccinated, is that 10 violations? Or is it just the policy? We don't know this yet. Unfortunately, what's happening is our residents and our communities are tied up in this political struggle between what the federal mandate is and what our state executive thinks should be happening. And again, as I said at the outset, it's so unfortunate because you've got volunteer boards who have, again, a fiduciary duty to their residents. They don't have the luxury of just being a resident. They agreed to sit on that board, which means they acquired a fiduciary obligation and duty, and they can be held responsible if they get this wrong.
Okay, let me try and chunk this down. If you have a management company and they have over 100 employees, it's really the management company's problem. So for the board, really nothing to worry about. If I'm not managed by a management company or they have less than 100 employees, I'm only subject to the 381 rule if I have patrons, and the majority of our audience likely don't. Again, everybody, this is subject to your own attorneys. So most of us won't fall under this 381 rule and $5,000 fine. So what does that mean in terms of our ability to set some good policies like mask requirements indoors, or opening or closing amenities, or any kind of congregating? In fact, my next question is about how people are meeting right now. I wanted to share that for the audience to see, but I really know we have a bunch of audience saying, what should I do about masks? What should we do about amenity usage and congregating as a community?
First of all, I think masks and social distancing and virtual meetings, that's low-hanging fruit. That's stuff you should be doing. The complicated area is the vaccinations. Who do you want to be vaccinated and why? That gets real complicated because of these conflicting mandates with the federal government and the state. In terms of requiring masks in indoor areas right now, still makes sense. Still makes sense because we are dealing with a high positivity rate. We're dealing with a highly transmissible virus. And again, in multifamily buildings, somebody who's immunocompromised, even if they're, and you touched on this, James, with the older communities, they can't blink themselves out of the building. Those common areas, the corridors, the elevators, the lobby, those are extensions of their homes. So if we're not taking steps to safeguard them, to at least get them out of the building, that can be a problem down the road. The social distancing, the congregating, there is no reason right now to be having parties in your party rooms where you've got outside guests coming in. I don't even think it's a good idea to be having, groups from different households congregating, particularly in our older communities where Bernie's graphs showed that the older the age, even if you're vaccinated, you need to be using other tools to prevent virus transmission. And those tools are masks, distancing.
Okay, as always, we're tightening up on our time here, Donna. Mariness, please put up the question 4. Donna, I want to move to building inspections because there is a couple of ordinances that are coming out, and this will expand, I think, across Florida anyways. But there's a lot of questions on this mask thing coming in. Well, what if my owner resident doesn't wear a mask? What do we do? How do we enforce this one?
It's about how do you enforce a parking violation? How do you enforce a pet violation? How do you enforce a guest violation? These are the same. You've got the same tools. You've got fining. You've got suspension of use rights, and you've got contacting your attorney to send out a demand letter. Look, as a board, you don't have to solve every problem, but you have to be able to show that you took, affirmative steps to address the violation. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay, Mariness, please share the results on virtual meetings. And while we're sharing, Donna, do we need to do anything special to hold a virtual meeting in terms of our documents, or do we have to go back to at least hybrid now?
Well, you do. Listen, let me say this. In terms of holding virtual membership meetings, you absolutely need to have a board resolution that authorizes your members to participate virtually in a membership meeting pursuant to Chapter 617. So if you've been holding membership meetings and have not passed that resolution, you need to speak to your association attorney as soon as possible. Boards have been able to meet virtually. That's not a problem. But certainly my strong recommendation would be that you should be looking to incorporate this into your governing documents as well. So it's abundantly clear that you can do this. And I also believe, lastly, James, that the legislature is going to make it even clearer that this is a possibility.
Okay, Marinette, please share the results. Audience, this is really mostly for you to see what your peers are doing in terms of meetings. Donna, and then Marinette, let's, I think it'll lead nicely in. Let's put up question 5. Donna, building inspections are a hot topic, obviously, with the terrible tragedy in the Champlain Towers South. I saw Boca Raton came out with an ordinance recently. We probably expect more. We will do, we've had enough questions about this now. We'll do a whole session and we'll invite an engineer to join us, Donna, maybe at our next webinar. But have you looked at the Boca Ordinance, and what do you see in there that would be meaningful for our audience? Because we will likely see more of those.
Yeah, I have looked at the Boca law. So the Boca law basically applies to all buildings 4 stories or higher. It requires certifications every 30 years and then recertifications 10 years after that. It requires it allots only 180 days to make repairs that are reflected on those certification reports. So you don't have a lot of time to make repairs. And if that report reveals voluminous repairs, you're really going to be under some significant pressure to get that done, and you better have your finances in order to be able to pay for it to meet that 180-day deadline. And then lastly, the Boca Ordinance creates a database so those reports, so residents can easily check the safety status of their buildings. But that being said, these reports are part of the official records anyhow, James, that are open to inspection for the owners, and owners should be looking at that. And remember, in Florida, if you have a website, if you're operating more than 150 units, you're required to have a website. Those safety reports should be uploaded onto the website so people can take a look.
Marina, share the results. What we asked here, Donna, was how current are inspections in our audience's buildings, and it's actually fairly even across. Oh, yeah, sharing the results. But we'll of course have an engineer on either next webinar or the one after. But comments as you look at these results, we've got some, 21% are really current, and even last 3 years is current. 5 years is probably getting out there in terms of prudence. But do you have comments? I know you're not an engineer, but more from a legal perspective on frequencies that you think will have to move to in response to this latest tragedy?
Well, we're all entirely dependent on what the engineers say, because none of us are engineers. And even if I have boards where I may have a retired professional structural engineer on board, the recommendation is you hire the correct engineering expert to help you. I do have some comments, with regard to how often you should be undertaking these sorts of reports. It's going to depend on the age of your building. The older the building gets, the more it's going to need a checkup, just like human beings. The older we get, we need checkups more frequently. Your location. If you're located on a barrier island, you're going to be subject to more corrosive effects. If it also is going to depend a lot on the type of maintenance, regular maintenance you've performed over the years. And again, this is also why we recommend you hire an engineer immediately after transition to make sure that you're not saddled with any construction defect that may not have been addressed and may not have been noticed right away. And boards communities who don't undertake those post-transition engineering reports, I do think they put themselves at a disadvantage. And then lastly, I would say, in terms of the engineering reports, I just lost my train of thought. There was one more I wanted to mention about engineering reports.
We're going to save that for our next webinar, because I had a couple reserve questions that came in from our last webinar with Nicole that I just wanted to ask you about. One of the things that we expect to happen is inflation, and look at what happened to lumber costs during COVID. How do we factor in possibly big changes in input costs in our reserves. And
Reserve studies just essential. And listen, the legislature may mandate reserve studies. Now, a lot's going to depend on what happens in that 2022 session, James. I have every belief that there are going to be some significant changes, and it's important for people to start changing their mindset now. There's going to be changes regarding reserves, and possibly either increasing the percentage by which members, the threshold that is needed to waive or partially fund them, or taking that choice away altogether. There will be more frequent engineering reporting requirements. In terms of, how do you figure out what you need to reserve? It shouldn't be numbers that you're pulling out of the air, okay? It shouldn't just be board members thinking of what they think sounds good or what they think will be acceptable. Use experts. Again, this is about reaching out and employing the proper experts to help you come up with those figures for your reserve schedule.
I think this is very interesting. One of the questions that came in, can we start with 10% reserve funding? Was a question that came in. And I want to explain to the audience, Donna, the way reserves works is you do a reserve study and you have a target amount of money you want when the repair or the replacement is required. And then, so if it's $100 and it's 10 years, you put $10 a year away. But you may find because you haven't been reserving, it's $100, there's only 5 years left to useful life. You've got to put $20, but it's not like the moment you do a reserve study, you have to put all the money in. You simply have to take what that value is divided by the number of years and start funding it. So don't get me wrong, it's going to impact maintenance fees, but it's not as shocking as one would think because all reserves are kind of self-policing. You will never perfectly estimate the cost of the roof 30 years from now.
You will never perfectly estimate the cost of the roof, but what is a certainty is that the roof will need to be replaced. Yeah. What is a certainty is that the building is going to need to be maintained. So there's a reason, that the legislature required that disclaimer language in bold font. And I don't know if people have just become numb to it, but there will be a large special assessment at the end of the day. If you've been waiving or significantly underfunding reserves for decades, there will come a price at some point, and we're seeing it now with special assessments in the tens of thousands of dollars per unit, and it's like people are suddenly shocked that they have to pay these level of assessments, but the reserves have been waived for decades, and the building has just gotten older and older.
Yeah. Well, Donna, I think between our last webinar and this one, the Delta variant just took off. We thought it was very important. We had Dr. Fernandez and some commentary on what that means to our communities. So we kind of reallocated some of our time this week, but we haven't done the engineering and the reserve discussion justice yet. So for the audience, I just want you to know we're very conscious of that, and we are going to do a deeper dive into there for you, but we're trying to keep these current and timely. So Donna, we've run out of time again. Our audience, we so appreciate your leadership in the community and the opportunity to share experts like Donna and Dr. Fernandez with you. So thank you for participating full in. We appreciate the poll results because it's nice to share with you. Donna, so grateful for your contribution as always, and we shall see everyone next month.
Thanks for having me back.
Bye, everybody.